All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first general meeting of the spring semester of UMN Energy Club. Glad that you all could make it. We all started class yesterday, of course. Hope everyone's semester is off to a good start, that you all had a restful winter break. And I hope that those of you, either you have watched it today or you will watch it later today, the historic events at the Capitol Hill. So I hope that you'll get a chance to enjoy this day in history. If you haven't already signed in, the link is on screen here. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So for everyone's, for full disclosure, we are recording this meeting so that those who can't make this meeting time, there are a few folks who aren't able to make this time for schedule and conflict reasons. So if you'd like to turn on your camera, that would be wonderful. If you want to use a virtual background, that also works. But if you don't feel comfortable, no shame, that's totally fine. We're glad to have you here. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to let us know. We're going to be starting our book club this week. We're working on selecting readings and figuring out what kind of pacing we're going to have. So if you're interested, feel free to email me, or you can also send it to the Energy Club inbox and we'll get back to you and answer any questions you have. So later in the semester, coming up in the coming weeks, we'll hear from our communications director, Olivia, who will talk about how switching to a plant-based diet could be good for fighting against the climate crisis. The week after, the first week of February, we'll hear from Professor Gabe Chan and Ms. Olivia Shares from the Humphrey School. They're going to talk about the Masters in STEP, which is Science, Technology, Energy, and Policy. So if you're interested in that, that's a great. We've had Professor Chan speak before, and he has a lot of really great experience to draw on. Excuse me. And then after that, I'll be giving a quick sus chat on green chemistry, which is a topic I'm really passionate about. So we hope that you'll join us for those meetings as well. And to introduce today's speaker, we have Ms. Jay Drake Hamilton. Jay is Fresh Energy's Science Policy Director, an expert in climate and energy policy at the state and national levels. Her responsibilities include scientific analysis and policy development of clean energy solutions to global warming that will maximize economic opportunities. Jay represents Fresh Energy at international climate summits and showcases Minnesota's nation-leading deep carbon reductions to global audiences. Hamilton serves on the advisory board of the Irving Institute for Energy and Society at Dartmouth College. She earned her undergraduate and graduate degrees in physical geography from Dartmouth College and the University of Minnesota, with an emphasis on climatology and water resources, and was formerly the assistant professor at the George Washington University. Thank you so much, Jay, for joining us and for sharing your experience with us. And with that, I'll go ahead and end my screen share here so you can start yours.
Thanks, everyone. It's great to be with you. Can you all see this slide? Does it look like the right screen to you, Vijay?
Yep, that looks good to me.
Okay. And so I'm so glad to talk to you. I'll be able to answer, I hope maybe all of your questions about our work on policy. I work for this now very old, a 30-year-old nonprofit, nonpartisan energy and climate nonprofit based always in Minnesota. And when I joined it, I was the second person on staff. And last year we got our 30th person. And we are so happy with this second accomplishment that's on the screen now, because before last week, it would not have been possible to make that statement. What we've noticed is that, especially in the last 2.5 years, utilities across Minnesota have gotten very much on board, moving as fast as possible past coal-fired power and overwhelmingly to the much cheaper renewable forms of energy. It's been happening so fast that it means that it has given me, for the first time, some very real optimism about solving the climate change problem, because the power sector is moving so rapidly toward decarbonization. And it's really amazing to see CEOs of utilities who I think are Democrats and others who I very much know are Republicans are all favoring this. And in fact, in most cases, these utilities are retiring their coal-fired power faster than they originally anticipated. The decision that was announced last week was by one of the laggard utilities in Minnesota. Maybe some of you got your power growing up from Minnesota Power. And now they have moved to the forefront. And Minnesota Power made the announcement that until last week, they had no plans to retire their remaining 2 coal plants. These are 2 plants, large plants, that are still running just west of Grand Rapids, Minnesota, in the little town of Cohasset. And we thought that it was going to take us more years of work to make those retirements happen. And Minnesota Power announced that they have closure dates for those coal firing units. So that means that when those close, and the latest they will do that, the first will close by 2030, the second will close in 2035, and those are still years way off. And what you should know about years that are way off, in this sector, that means that they are likely to close before their retirement dates, because the economics are not merely transitioning. Transition is a word that I heard a lot today when I was watching some of the inauguration of President Biden. And a lot of people in the news media used expressions of relief that they had just witnessed a peaceful transition to a new federal administration. And transition is a word for a long time in my work, like 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even last year, we were talking about the steady but too slow transition to clean electricity. And now I'm going to talk to you about some of those changes that have been announced in the last three years. Now, many utilities themselves are talking about it as an utter transformation in the climate and in the energy sector. And so that's what we need more of. We need more deployment of clean electricity everywhere in the world soon. To wit, we need about a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions no later than 2030. And that's not big enough, because we also need to work on electrifying everything else. Electrifying cars, electrifying SUVs, electrifying trucks, electrifying buses, electrifying how we heat our homes, electrifying how we heat the hot water for our showers, using heat pump water heaters. And we need to electrify every industry that we can do so to. So what has happened is, I've just mentioned last week's Minnesota Power announcement, but it was predated by Xcel Energy, the largest utility company in the state, which made the announcement in May 2019. I was there in front of the CEO when he said, we are going to get 80% reduction in our carbon emissions by 2030, but by 2050, we are promising today that every one of our electric customers in 8 different states between Canada and the Mexican border will have 100% renewable and battery-powered electricity. And he said, along this way, we are going to be retiring every one of our remaining coal plants. That means that Xcel Energy had announced that they would go to 0% coal by around 2030. Second, the second largest power plant utility in the state, which is known as Great River Energy, which is a cooperative community. It provides power, GRE as it's called, provides power to 28 member co-ops in a large geography of the state. And they made an announcement that they made in about May of 2020, a year later. And I'm going to tell you a little secret. We knew that they were going to make this announcement a year earlier than they announced it. But they made us commit to keeping it a secret. But on the day they made their announcement in May of 2020, we included a comment in their press release, because what Great River Energy had done was a first of its kind thing I know in the utility world in the nation. First, it's important to know that Great River Energy, as recently as 2005, had a system that was 95% coal-fired. And what they announced in 2020 is that by the end of 2022, next year, less than 2 years from today, they will get a 95% reduction in carbon emissions. And they are going to close their largest coal plant in North Dakota for economic reasons. Now, you may have caught that when I mentioned they are going to close their large coal plant. It's 1,150 megawatts of coal, virtually in the center of North Dakota. And when we first started targeting that coal plant, it's called Coal Creek. Very descriptive, huh? We started talking to the CEO of Great River Energy about that coal plant about 3 or 4 years ago. And we have breakfast with him sometimes we have lunch with him, but we do it 4 or 5 times a year. And the first 3 years that we were talking to him quarterly, whenever we brought up this Coal Creek plant, he said, he would kind of laugh. And he would say, Michael and Jay, our CEO, he would say, now you very well know that the Coal Creek station will be the last coal plant still operating in North Dakota, because he thought that it was the cheapest coal plant. And part of that reason is because it is a coal plant that is located on the same property as the coal mine. So to his benefit, he is able to get the coal into his coal-fired power plant without the assistance of a train bringing the coal in. And so we knew that was true. But around last year, we started having more intense conversations with the CEO. And he committed us to silence, but he told us about a year ago that they were starting to find that burning coal for electricity operations at that site in North Dakota were becoming overly expensive, to the tune of people who were buying this coal-fired power, and that includes 700,000 Minnesotans who buy their power from Great River Energy. In total, every year, they were paying $200 million more than they would if they were buying wind power. Does that astonish you? It should. It should flabbergast you, and it should anger you. Well, they found out this, they were willing to admit this to us about a year before they announced that they were closing the plant, because they had to get their ducks in a row, because their CEO sells his power, coal power, to 28 different member distributive co-ops in Minnesota. And he wanted to convince them all that they had to close this coal plant. And he was putting together the economic case for that. But is the other side of that story. One of these members is called Conexus Energy. Maybe you've heard of Conexus Energy. Maybe you live in a place that gets its power from Conexus right now. It's based like, it sells power in Isanti County, Sherburne County, other related counties. They have an interesting CEO. He is a very dedicated Republican, but he is also the largest customer for buying coal power from Great River Energy. It's like an outsized big customer. He buys 40% of their power. So it's interesting, the CEO of that utility has a little more sway with the CEO. And a lot longer than a year ago, starting about 2 or 3 years ago, this smart CEO had discovered that his customers were paying too much money to buy that coal. I don't know whether he likes coal or doesn't like coal, and I don't care. But what he went and advised the CEO providing his coal to do is to find him a way to buy wind power instead. And in fact, the CEO of Conexus threatened the CEO that if he didn't make it possible for his customers to stop wasting so much money on buying coal, he was going to cut his contract with GRE. And he said, I am going to leave GRE and I will go out on the market to buy cheaper renewable energy for my customers. Now, we don't know exactly how much money his customers were losing, but we now know that all of the customers of GRE are now losing $200 million a year. That means they are spending that much money when they don't have to. They could save $200 million every year. But we can give you a guess that it's about 40% of that money is being lost by Conexus customers because they buy 40% of the energy from GRE. So that lit a fire under the CEO because he'd already been investigating what he could do to save all of his customers more money and came up with the answer. And the answer was to stop burning coal in North Dakota as soon as possible, even if it meant closing down the plant and walking away. And believe me, they met with at least 4 other utilities, told them this proposition. They asked each one of those utilities, what if we gave you that coal-fired power plant for free? Would you take that gift? And each one of those utility executives went back to their own home teams, did their own analysis, and they had to come back and tell GRE, no, because we also can't afford to lose for our customers $200 million a year. So that is what GRE announced in spring of 2020. It said, we are making an economic decision. And he had just come from a board meeting with his 28 member utility customers, and they all had voted, yes, we agree with retiring this coal plant as soon as possible and replacing it with large purchases of wind power, and made that announcement. And what was really flabbergasting about that was how quickly this will happen. This is lightning fast in the power sector to close an enormous coal plant in less than 2 years. So because of what Xcel has announced and what GRE announced last year and what Minnesota Power announced last week, and then on top of that, I haven't mentioned what municipal power companies in Minnesota have done. Because I had a chance to talk with SIMPA. Do you know what SIMPA stands for? The Southern Minnesota Municipal Power Agency. And they provide power to 18 cities across Minnesota. The biggest city is Rochester. The smallest city is Grand Marais. And we at Fresh Energy knew that they owned 41% of the largest coal plant in Minnesota that had the rest of it owned by Xcel Energy. And that is the last coal plant that Xcel is going to close down. They're going to close it in 2030. So we wanted to talk with SIMPA about what they were going to do when their partially owned coal plant was going to be sold, was going to maybe sold or maybe just retired. It's looking like it will just be retired. And that started a whole conversation with SIMPA. And, I've told you about us having regular conversations with CEOs, not just CEOs of utilities, but CEOs of businesses all over Minnesota. And I'll tell you frankly what we're looking for. We have a set of core values at Minnesota. And we also know to move policy in a big way to influence the climate problem in a way that's going to allow us to win the climate problem, to solve it. We need lots more businesses on our side. So we decided, this was about 5 years ago, to approach as many businesses as possible and see if we could develop relationships with their CEOs, and we have done so, and to see if we can determine which businesses share some of our core values. And at the outset, we expected to be looking for a couple companies who we could mutually agree on really liking 50% of the same core values, and that we could work with those companies. But guess what we found? In all of the companies we started talking to, we found in most cases, we shared core values, 85% of them, with the CEOs of utility companies. And that's when we very much came to the conclusion that that meant we can do projects together. And we can make one of those projects working on climate action. So the fourth utility we started talking to was SIMPA, because we knew they were about to lose access to their coal plant. And we knew that Xcel Energy had been talking to them. We didn't know exactly what that conversation had been like. But we were also asked to talk to SIMPA by some of its customers. And this is also a big way that Fresh Energy works on policy, because we have members all over the state of Minnesota. And we really don't like it when some of the kids who are customers of SIMPA are lied to by their utility. And we found out that that had happened. And this was about 2 years ago when I got a call. I think she was 14 or 15 at the time. She called me up down in St. Paul, and she lives in Grand Marais. And she said, Jay, we are trying to get our power company, which is SIMPA, to start putting more information about the climate change problem on their website. And I said, well, that is great. And how have they responded to that? And she said, well, I was really impressed that they sent from their headquarters in Rochester all the way up to Grand Marais. They sent their top 3 people up to little Grand Marais to talk to me, this 14-year-old kid, and others in our community. And you know what they told us, Jay? They said, well, we sell power to 18 different cities around Minnesota. Grand Marais is the smallest one. And they said, we have to tell you that we are not hearing about climate change concerns from any of the other 17 cities. Now, when she told me that, I said, well, unfortunately, that is not true. I know that is true because I have members who are customers in all of their 18 cities. And I know many of those customers are very concerned and very vocal about climate change. So I called up the CEO of SIMPA and I said, I wonder if we can talk soon. And that in the couple of months we were talking, he finally invited me to come to his board of directors meeting. Now that means some of his board of directors are people who run the utility in every one of the 18 communities. So it was maybe 30 or 35 people in the room. The only thing he prohibited me from doing is he said, I don't want you to bring any PowerPoint slides. Well, that didn't bother me at all because he said, we just really want to have a candid conversation to find out how Fresh Energy analyzes energy and climate and how you make your decisions and have a candid conversation. We talked for about 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours. And we had a really great conversation. And you know what? About 6 months later, they called me up and they said, we're ready to talk to you now about how we're going to manage our company without this coal-fired power plant that Xcel is going to retire. And he said, this isn't public yet. It's not going to go public until February of 2020. But we are going to replace that coal power with 50% wind power and 50% solar energy. And I expressed my surprise and that I was thrilled by this and I wanted to get more information about it. So now we say that all 3 types of utilities in Minnesota, the investor-owned utilities like Xcel and Minnesota Power, the biggest cooperative utility, Great River Energy, and one of the biggest municipal utilities, SIMPA, are all moving in the same direction based on economics. And so that also tells me why we're going to win the climate problem as well. All right, I'm going to go on to my next slide, or try to. Now it won't do it. Let's see, it's not moving forward. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and come back to this. Let's see. Oops. And are you seeing a slide now? Oops,
Yes.
Yes. And does it say Minnesota policy advances?
Oh, we don't see a slide yet.
Oh, okay. Let me see. All right. Maybe I have to find the Zoom link and figure it out. Just a second. Well, I'll tell you what's on the slide as I go. Okay. So Here is what is on Fresh Energy's plate with future policy advances. Now, we don't take these early retirements announced for all coal-fired power plants in Minnesota to be considered really done until the dates that a utility has announced is actually codified and approved by the regulators of utilities, which are the 5 people at the Public Utilities Commission. And they do this by approving or not approving the integrated resource plan, the 15-year plan of each utility. And on February 1, Minnesota is filing one of these integrated resource plans. It needs to get it approved this year in 2021. And Xcel on February 11th, 10 days later, is filing their resource plan and also needs to get its approval in 2021. We want to get these dates for retirement codified in those resource plans this year. And we want another big thing. Both of those utilities are currently thinking about replacing some of their coal power with new, what we call fossil natural gas plants. And we don't think that's an advancement because natural gas is another fossil fuel, so a lot more greenhouse gas emissions. So we've also been very clear with the utilities that we're going to fight them at the Public Utilities Commission, and we're going to bring very advanced information to that record. And we think that we win, not get no new fossil gas plants in the case of any utilities. At the legislature, we're working to get to 100% clean electricity bill by 2040 in Minnesota, to get that bill passed in the House of Representatives and passed in the Minnesota Senate. And there will be cut points in this. So it will also require us to get to 90% carbon-free electricity no later than 2035, en route to getting 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. So that is essentially the trajectory that President Biden is now on the national level. And so we are working at this passing in Minnesota, but we're also, of course, very interested in getting a similar clean energy standard passed in the Congress. And we know that the simplest way to do that in the federal Congress, because the Minnesota U.S. Senator Tina Smith introduced a clean energy standard bill last year. So it should simply be updated, and then it should pass through both the House and the Senate there. Now, there are two different hard things to do, but what's very interesting is that, I don't know if you've heard of the study that came out a couple of months ago from the University of California, Berkeley, late 2020, and it reported a game-changing finding that getting 90% clean electricity by 2035 is not only feasible, but it can be accomplished not just in places like Minnesota, but nationally, while actually decreasing wholesale electricity costs. This is a huge deal. And so it's very important for these policies to move forward in Minnesota and at the national level to make policy makers realize they need a new reality in the power sector. They can no longer be talking about along the edges, transitioning slowly to renewable energy. They need to talk about ditching the old technologies, especially coal-fired power and natural gas-fired power as being too expensive. So we have labeled those two as our first biggest priorities. In addition, we are going to be working at the Minnesota legislature in doing more than the Minnesota Clean Cars, which you've probably heard of, which has been led by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and Governor Tim Walz, that they have written a regulation that would make Minnesota adopt LEV standards and ZEV standards for cars. And the big thing there is it would require manufacturers of electric vehicles, for example, to bring some of those to Minnesota, bring them to car lots on Minnesota. No one would be required to buy an electric vehicle, but the biggest barrier that we're trying to overcome is that most of the electric vehicles that are manufactured, a lot of them in America, are not available in Minnesota. And people need to learn about this technology. They need to test drive it. They need to kick the tires. They need to open the hood and see how few moving parts they have, and talk to a bunch of people about it and see if this technology will work in their household and for their lifestyle. And then we are also driving the building sector in Minnesota to produce cleaner, more efficient buildings. The biggest thing that we're working on is we are working with legislators of both Republicans and among Democrats who are very interested in hearing from a lot of different cities and communities across Minnesota that their people would like them to take their energy codes and make them, if it's okay with their voters, to be stronger, to be faster, to be more aggressive, to allow them to transform the buildings in their community to better buildings. And we think all of these things are really going to benefit, especially lower income people in Minnesota, people who live in under-resourced communities, people who are BIPOC, people who overwhelmingly suffer the problems of climate change. And we have seen very clearly all across Minnesota in the last more than a year to learn that we are being, unfortunately, too often a racist society, and we need to clean up those inequities. And there's a lot that we need to do, but we think energy policies are going to be a big thing that we have to unlock. And as we think about what are the new jobs we're trying to create, part of the reason why I am so optimistic about solving this climate problem is because I see many things affordable and feasible and possible now that were not affordable and feasible even 10 years ago. And we need to ride on that wave and move it forward very much more rapidly. So I was excited today to see that one of the first executive orders President Biden signed was to make Minnesota and the whole United States join once again the Paris Agreement, to jettison our decision 4 years ago to leave the Paris Agreement and instead to work with colleagues all over the world to try our damnedest to solve this problem. And I'm very proud that I'm going to be in Glasgow, if it works out, in November of 2021, to be there alongside President Biden and the new climate czar, John Kerry, who for many years was our Secretary of State under Obama and was there with me at 2015 for the signing of the first Paris Agreement. So I'd like to apologize to you for not showing that slide, but I know that VJ has them, and so he can email them out to you too. There was only 4 slides. But I want to see what questions you might have about policies. I've given you a big picture of this very tantalizing and very real, affordable move, very fast away from coal to renewable energy, and all of these other ways we can start electrifying very quickly many other parts of the economy. But it's kind of mind-numbing to think about the scale, because we need to now deploy every year between 2 and 3 times more wind and solar and better batteries faster than we have in any other previous year. So it's going to take a lot of work to do that. As well, we're going to have to convince very many people in all the non-power sectors to investigate very rapidly shifting over the fuel used in their own sector to electricity. And we're going to need a lot of friends. So I love the fact that the new administration has brought a lot of good, very experienced friends into the White House with them. But I also know what's going to happen as we rejoin the Paris Agreement, because the first thing that President Biden will need to bring, well before I see him in Glasgow in November 2021, is he's going to need to re-up the United States commitment to the rest of the world. And he needs to align it with what the best science says. So he's going to need to show what are the policies you will have in place in the United States that will allow you to decrease emissions economy-wide by 50% by 2030. And I know because I've already talked to some of Biden's team, and I know that a lot of the policies that they're going to need to bring to this national commitment are policies coming out from states, including from Minnesota. So what I'm telling young people like you who are in school, I know that there is a lot of depression about all kinds of things right now. But I would tell you the thing not to be depressed about is climate change, because what it means is if we are going to try our darnest to solve this problem, we are going to eventually start putting a lot more people to work at really great jobs, most of them at their home states. And so if you're getting yourself informed and trained up to work in something, and there's a lot related to cutting carbon emissions, you're on the right track. And we need all of the help we can get. But now, I would also like to see if you have any questions for me. And I'm going to try to get out of the screen.
Anyone else has any questions, please feel free to throw them out there. I can start with a question that I had. So you mentioned that wind is becoming more affordable really rapidly.
Yeah.
Is the situation the same with solar? And if so, what's allowing both wind and solar to become more affordable? Because don't both PV cells and turbines have a high capital cost?
Well, the cost of wind turbines has gone down about 70% in the last 10 years. And the technologies for solar photovoltaics have gone down almost 90% in the last 10 years. And wind was the first one to break the cost threshold and become cheaper. Cheaper if you were talking now to a CEO from a utility, they would tell you they've been cheaper than any other utility we have, than any other resource we have for about the last 3 years. And solar will catch up to where wind is. Most people think in about a year and a half or 2 years. The truth is, we need big investments in both of those technologies because the scale of climate change means we need to make much larger investments in wind technologies, especially offshore wind. And so as a native New Yorker, I'm very proud that New York has just approved the biggest ever off-wind investment off of New York than any other state here. It's amazing. And as well, it's interesting to read what they're doing because they are investing in 2 of the ports, in one port in Brooklyn and one way upstate in Albany, because those ports in Albany will start to become a place where the very large wind turbines are now manufactured. They're going to be brought in pieces down to the Brooklyn port, and they are going to retrain under-resourced people to take those jobs. And isn't that a great way to build a better community around New York? And more states should get their clue too. So it's been that the technology has gotten better in a few years' time. There's been, and we really have to thank people in Japan and in Germany who invested first in some of these technologies and did it when it wasn't saving them a lot of money. And we're really grateful that they did that. But what's really enticing to me is what's happening with batteries. And the standard in utilities are 4-hour batteries. And what anyone in Minnesota will tell you, anyone who's experienced a polar vortex here, is the polar vortex comes down from the Arctic into Minnesota. Doesn't happen every year, but it can be a time that is 4 days or a week and a half where there's no sun and often no wind blowing. And this is a disaster to a utility company. So Great River Energy, the utility I was talking about earlier, is thinking about it. And as part of their project, they have gone to a company called Flow Energy, which is founded by an engineer at MIT and is funded by Bill Gates and the US Department of Energy. And they have developed a battery that is not a 4-hour lithium ion battery, but a 150-hour rated battery that is based on solar, which is easily obtained and about 1/10 of the cost of lithium. And they're going to bring this company to do a pilot project to see how those 150-hour batteries work in Minnesota weathers. And it's going to be built in 2023 in Cambridge, Minnesota. So we can all drive by it at least. And I hope we get access to some of the data that shows whether these batteries are able to work well in our conditions. And many of the other utilities, including Minnesota Power, in their announcement that they made just last week, they said, yeah, we've been thinking about investing in some of those 150-hour batteries too, because we also have polar vortex concerns. Thank goodness we're finally getting advancements very rapidly in batteries because it was just moribund for like 30 years. Batteries never got any better, you know. Thank goodness.
So I also have a kind of similar question. I'm always interested in seeing how the different climates play into energy concerns. So do you see that there are certain aspects of regional climates between, the 18 cities that you were talking about? Does that play in effect, or is it more of a state level climate that leads to, Minnesota having different energy or renewable energy and energy concerns than, say, Texas?
Well, we often have many of the same concerns. So batteries are going to be a solution if this battery is successful, and I don't know yet whether it will prove itself out. I hope it does, and I hope there are many more competitors working on different combinations of batteries. In fact, Form Energy that I mentioned, they're being very closed-mouthed about what their technology is so far. And that means they're testing many combinations of technologies, and that's a good thing. Everyone needs more batteries because we know that with more climate change, and that's going to be inevitable, there are going to be periods. The big scary periods for utilities are not only the polar vortex, which is blessedly not something that comes down as far as like Texas, but on the other end are heat waves. So heat waves are going to be generally a case of many days of non-moving air, so no wind, and very large uses of power to cool, to make it able for people to survive heat waves. So batteries are a real problem. Now, often sometimes you're hearing about people who haven't yet gotten it, that the power sector is in a transformation. And they always like to throw batteries out as a problem. And I say, well, maybe not so much. You should pay attention to what's going on with the cool engineers. And you should help them invest more in studying this. Does anyone have another question?
What did you say that battery was made out of again? Like what kind of battery it was?
Form Energy calls it an aqueous sulfur battery.
Okay.
And you can find them on the web. They're Form Energy. And what they say is they're investigating a lot of different combinations, but they seem to have pretty much gelled on sulfur. And the sulfur is very easily obtained in a lot of places, and it's very inexpensive. So it's also going to be very important for Great River Energy to find out what the actual operational costs of these 150-hour batteries are. But just having an 150-hour battery, that is now like 6.5 days. So most polar vortexes don't last that long. So we know that a lot of utilities are going to need many, many more batteries that are affordable. And what keeps me up at night is, I mentioned when I started talking about, well, we're moving toward 100% clean electricity or carbon-free electricity by 2040, Bill, in Minnesota. And I really think I'm more focused on the 90% clean energy, carbon-free energy by 2035, because we need to move that fast very quickly, and it's so cheap. We know that we can do that affordable now. It's going to take longer to get that extra 10%, but we don't even need to worry about it now. We need to get more states committed to getting to 90% by 2035. And so does President Biden, because he's been running on that since August. So now we have to hold him accountable to getting that done. Well, I think we're at 7, and I want to thank you. And I'm sure VJ will send along my email and my phone number. If you come up with more questions, please feel free to run them by me some other time. And I want to thank you for your attention. You're a great group. And if you ever want to learn more about policy, give me a holler. Thank you so much. Bye now.
Thank you very much, Jay, for
Thank
speaking
you.
with us. You can learn more about Fresh Energy here at www.fresh-energy.org. And
Yeah.
if you'd like to reach out to Jay, you can find her contact information here.
Oh, thank you, VJ. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, of course, this video will be posted in case you want to find her contact information later. And very briefly, to finish up here, let's see. Yep, so in the coming weeks, and a lot of topics to come. And if you have other friends who you think might be interested in more of what's coming later in the semester, feel free to send them this Z-link to sign up for our newsletter. And feel free to check out our social media. And if you haven't already signed in, you can go ahead and sign in here. But otherwise, thank you for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too.